Bonsoir. Mon nom est Amélie Masson-Labonté, coordonnatrice des activités culturelles ici au Musée McCord, et j'aimerais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cet échange privilégié entre Hélène Samson, conservatrice des archives photographiques Notman, et notre artiste en résidence de renommée internationale, le Torontois Kent Monkman. Cette présentation se veut un complément à l'exposition « Bienvenue à l'atelier » présentée au 3e étage du musée jusqu'au 1er juin 2014. La durée de l'entretien, qui se déroulera uniquement en anglais, sera de 45 minutes, suivie d'une période de questions bilingue. Madame Suzanne Sauvage, directrice du musée, profitera ensuite de votre présence pour annoncer le lancement d'une campagne de financement en vue d'acquérir l'œuvre de M. Monkman. La soirée se terminera par une séance de signature dans le hall du musée autour de 19h15. So, good evening. My name is Amélie Masson-Labonté, coordinator of cultural activities here at the McCord Museum. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you tonight for this privileged interview between Hélène Samson, curator of the Notman Photographic Archives, and our internationally known artist in residence, Kent Monkman. This presentation conducted as an interview is meant to be a complement to the exhibition, Welcome to the Studio, presented on the 3rd floor of the museum until June 1st, 2014. The interview will last 45 minutes, followed by a question period. Mrs. Suzanne Sauvage, director of the museum, will then present to you the new fundraising campaign launched by the museum, which intends to buy Kent Monkman piece of art. The evening will end by a singing session in the museum entrance around 7:15. Now I will let you in the company of Kent Monkman and Hélène Samson. Thank you.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Amélie. Bonsoir, je suis ravie de vous voir comme ça en si grand nombre. Good evening. Kent is our artist in residence. And the program Artist in Residence has been conceived to create a link between the past and the present through the creation of a work of art by a contemporary artist. The McCord Museum invites the artist to search the collection in order to discover the past and to be inspired by it. To remind you of the main feature of the piece of the work of art. This is the work that Kent Monkman did for the museum. Welcome to the studio. It's an installation which comprises a huge painting with about 35 figures from the Notman Photographic Archives. And the composition of this painting is inspired by the Courbet painting L'Atelier du Peintre. And there's also an interactive part of this installation as the visitor is invited to sit on the stool and to take a photo of his reflection on the glass and to post that picture on Instagram. So, but we'll get more in the picture afterwards, in this installation afterwards. But just want to mention that Kent Monkman is well known for his painting, sculpture, and installation that often destabilize the constructed discourses of history, namely the story of colonization over the land, the culture, and the sexuality of Aboriginal people. His work at the McCord Museum addresses again colonialism and the cross-cultural relationship between white and Aboriginal people. But its major theme is the combination of photography and painting in the 19th century and today, also today. From another angle, we can say that it addressed the transformation of reality through artistic mediums. Good evening, Kent.
Hey.
It's really a pleasure to have you tonight, coming from Toronto.
It's great to be back.
Yes. Oh, Suzanne is there. Bon. And I would like to begin this interview by talking about the genesis of the project. Okay? So you told in August 2013, you had your first visit of the room where the installation was going to stand, and you said that it was a starting point of the project. Can you tell us what happened at that moment?
Sure.
That triggered all the idea of the installation?
So the project for me started about a year ago. I think it was January of last year. Suzanne invited me to participate in the program and showed me the gallery that was going to be available. And so I had done a project with the collection here a couple of years ago. I had an exhibition at Concordia at the Ellen Gallery, and I had an opportunity to explore some of the collection here and take some of the works from the collection and curate them into that exhibition. And at that time, I discovered the Notman collection, but with the work that I was creating in that exhibition, it was really just like skimming the Notman collection. So I just kind of took a note of that, thought if I ever get a chance to work with this museum again, I'm going to really dig deeper into the Notman archive, because what I did see of it I found fascinating, and just the sheer volume of it meant there was going to be some incredible things in the archive. So I came, when I looked in the room, I immediately felt with the black box, the floor-to-ceiling vitrines, that it had this, it really lent itself to photography. In fact, I felt like I was inside a camera. So that really affirmed my interest in exploring the Notman photographs. And so at that point, went back to the studio and kind of started thinking about, what this project would be. But the thing that I really took note of, just being in that room, was how, as an audience member, you would see yourself reflected in the glass cases. And at that time, I think it was an exhibition of textiles, but you couldn't help but sort of, notice that you were also part of the exhibition. So I thought, well, if I could really take advantage of that, the glass, and play with reflection, and also take advantage of the dark, sort of the black room, the black box, that I could, do something with the photographs. So then, I started the long process of looking through the collection, and I think there's how many Notman photographs?
Oh, there's the Notman, there are 400,000.
400,000.
Notman photographs.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot to look at.
So there was a lot.
We're going to go through the. Oh yes, and you were inspired by the reflection, but you were also inspired by the Courbet and the Courbet painting. And I think this is absolutely brilliant. Being an art historian, it's really something fascinating. And how did you get inspired by Courbet for this work?
Well, first of all, I knew that I wanted to make a painting because I'd really been interested in exploring that intersection of photography and painting. So when photography was just emerging, and how painters were using photography as a tool in their own work. And I knew that Delacroix had worked, done figure sketches from photographs. And so, in the back of my mind, I wanted to kind of reference that turning point when photography really emerged and started to kind of usurp the role of the painter, as not just for portraits, but just, telling stories. And so I wanted the exhibition to reference that turning point. And Courbet, this painting, again, it was one of those paintings that I'd come across years ago and just filed it away in the memory bank, thinking at some point I'm going to, work with this Courbet painting. I don't know what it is yet, but so this opportunity seemed to be the moment to respond to this. And I thought if I can make a painting of an artist's studio and put it behind the glass, then the audience themselves can sort of participate in that studio with their own reflection.
Yes, and we're going to go through the making of the painting.
Sure.
Here are, it's the wall in the exhibition, and it shows the 34 photographs that you've chosen from the collection. By the way, I want to mention that what you see are reproduction of the photograph. You may wonder why not vintage. And it was Kent ideas at the beginning to show a vintage print, but it's impossible for us to show vintage because most of them are on glass plate, negatives on glass plate, or very small pictures glued on the photograph glued on the picture book. So for the sake of visibility and also for the quality of the design, we decided to show reproductions of the Notman. Okay? But how did you proceed? Did you have some specific portrait in mind?
So, knowing that Delacroix and other painters in that period were looking at nudes, nude photographs, the first thing I searched for was nudes.
Nudes.
Did Notman have any nudes in his collection? And it turned out to be zero. I got 0 hits. But we did find some athletes, excuse me. And so I thought that was fairly close. And then, of course, I searched Aboriginal to see, had Notman photographed any Aboriginal people. And of course, we got a few hits there. Excuse me. And some of the photos that came up when I typed in Aboriginal actually weren't Aboriginal people at all. They were
a costume.
People wearing, French people from Montreal just dressing up like Indians. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so that started to kind of shape how the painting the composition was going to happen. I knew that I was going to be putting myself in the painting as Notman, as the artist, sort of in the central location.
At that point, you had the idea of a studio. You had the idea of a
yeah, and that actually helped kind of narrow down the search because, Notman photographed, exteriors, and there was there's so many things that he photographed. So within that collection of 400,000 photos, we were able to kind of at least focus on studio portraits. So that was another sort of way of narrowing down. And then we just ended up, instead of having thousands of pictures, we eventually got it down to hundreds and then had to make choices down from there. But I wanted the painting to feel like it was populated in a similar way to the Courbet painting. I wanted the studio to feel like an environment that was vibrant, that was dynamic, that had a variety of different people moving through it. Like like my art studio has collectors and curators and friends and my assistants, and so it's a dynamic place. And I wanted to kind of bring that energy from the Courbet painting, and I love that painting also because of the palette and the tonal range.
Yes, we will come to it.
Okay.
We'll come to it. And then, and this is maybe you'll find it interesting. After you've chosen the photograph, you made a paste-up, what we call a paste-up in the Notman vocabulary, a paste-up of the figure on the Courbet background. So do you have any, and this is very interesting because it's exactly the way that Notman works when he was doing his composite. To the difference that Notman was taking a picture when the composite was à son goût. He would take a picture of it, but you transform it as in a painting.
Right.
You made another step. But do you have any comment about that step of the work?
So this step this is my study. And normally for my paintings, I draw all the figures. So, but because I was working from specific source, I wanted to kind of maintain the integrity of these original images. Although I did change certain gestures and change the directions of people's gaze and so forth. But I decided, because I wasn't going to be doing as much drawing from scratch, that I could work with the photos in Photoshop and start to begin a layout to develop the composition, to develop the rhythms, compositional elements throughout the piece. And it was also a way of sizing things. And so some of the characters were chosen for their pose. Some of them were chosen just actually for their identity, yes, who they were. So there were a number of different reasons why I chose some of the different characters. But this was a very sort of effective way of, very quickly developing the composition.
And here is the final painting that we can see in the room. And it's great because we really can see the depth that you gave to this painting, la profondeur, les personnages nous apparaissent vraiment sur des plans différents. And the major, just for few information, it's your largest painting. Mm-hmm. It makes more than 7 meters long. And it took only 5 months from the inception to the vernissage. This is something very amazing, as quick as you can work on that. And this is about the relationship between photography and painting. And of course, there's many ways of interpreting this relationship. I don't really want to go in that, but I would like to know, what do you mind about the viewer's interpretation? Do you want us to grab something very specific, or how do you see the interpretation that we can make of your painting?
Well, this painting was intended to be kind of open, and these figures, the characters that I found in the Notman collection suggest certain ideas about identity, about history, but because these characters came from a wide range of Montreal society, they would never appear in the same room together. Mm-hmm. But the idea was to create an open kind of allegory for this idea of artistic transformation. So how does a painter take his material, his source material, and then transform it into a new something with a new meaning? And so my thinking about photography is that I do use photography as source material. What does a certain flower look like? What does a certain car look like? You get source material from the internet. In this case, it was the Notman collection. What does, how did people dress in that period of time? So it was a way of using the material to transform it into something new. And but after that, I should mention that after that Photoshop stage, there was a full small study made. Each panel would have been probably about 18 by 30 inches or something, and that was fully painted in order to determine all of the coloration and tonality before I went to the large version. So there was that intermediary step of getting to this point.
Okay, and here, this is, we're getting more in the painting now. This is the main character. It's main figure at the center of the painting. It's a kind of concatenation of Courbet, Notman, and Monkman, and you're holding a paintbrush, and it's about painting. And I would like to hear you about painting, and I would like to know actually what drives your work as a painter. And you can take your time to answer that, because I think it's my.
How much time do we have? Well, I believe in the power of painting, and I feel as though painting really got kind of reduced through this period of modernity, its original purpose really changed. And again, that kind of comes, not its original purpose, but when photography emerged, it really changed, you know, the direction of painting. And I guess probably about 14 years ago, I was in my studio feeling very frustrated as a painter, working with a kind of reduced vocabulary of painting. And I thought, you know, why am I painting like an abstract expressionist, you know? And it was part of my own journey as a painter to kind of understand what paint could do, but it left me with some questions about why I was painting and what, you know, the act of painting could achieve, what the end result could achieve. And I came across, you know, a number of paintings that were made by, you know, Europeans or white North American painters looking at Aboriginal people. And that's what began my sort of investigation of a more historical context for painting. I wanted to kind of, you know, go back to that period of painting where narrative was still important. And I felt like Aboriginal narratives had been kind of removed from this period of art history. It became so subjective from the Europeans' point of view that I wanted to go back and kind of, you know, develop my own language to build a vocabulary of painting that could challenge, I guess, these historical representations of who First Nations people were and are. So that really got me thinking about what I wanted to achieve as a painter. And but it takes a long time to get to a point where you can really develop the skills. And so I set out on a journey to study painting. And a lot of my recent work is kind of a challenge to that period of modern painting, which really kind of broke painting down. And in some of my most recent paintings, I'm using these, you know, very flat, modernist figurations, this compression of the flattening of pictorial space. I you know, use that as a metaphor to talk about how indigenous cultures have been kind of compressed, loss of language, loss of our own cultures over this last 150 years.
That's very interesting.
And then, you know, probably about 4 years ago, I was in Madrid at the Prado, and I just stood in front of this incredible Spanish history painting and just kind of had, you know, this incredible experience at the power, the emotional power that a painting could have. And so that really affirmed my own decision and my own choices, that my belief that painting could hold, you know, the power to tell contemporary stories. And I felt encouraged that, you know, in embracing this sort of lost language of painting and making it relevant to my own time, that I could, you know, kind of bring painting, you know, resurrected in a way, because I felt like it had been kind of given the short shrift, you know.
Yes, but it can painting can tell story, but it can tell story differently that photography does. It's maybe the presence of the painter is more powerful in painting than...
There's certainly a different, something happens, you know, when our world is filtered through a lens. It's not the same. And I was interested in making paintings that are not slavish to the photograph. I know it's easier just to take a photograph and, you know, try and reproduce it. It's much more interesting to me to transform that source material into something that feels more human. And I feel like painting has that quality, which is different. It's just different than photography.
Thank you. Now I would like to go to make some comparison between the photo that you've chosen and the figure painted in the work. Here is one of the main character with the painter. It's the photograph of the portrait of the young Percival Molson, and you have depicted him as your model, included in your inner circle, like Courbet did with his model. And what is interesting is that the figure on the canvas is another transformation. It's, I was going to show, you see, it's, the figure on the canvas is inspired by this painting by Jacques-Louis David, Léonidas au Thermopyle. And on this slide we can see the similarity between the pose of Percival Molson and the figure on the Léonidas. So could you talk about these series of transformation coming from the photograph to the models and to this inspiration, this model of Léonidas?
Sure. So the choice of the model, I mean, again, when I was looking for the nudes in the Notman collection, I couldn't find any, but I did find these young athletes, and I chose this handsome young fellow here. In Courbet's painting, you know, the female nude is standing behind him, and in a way he's turning his back to this, you know, classical tradition. It was his, you know, moving into a more modern tradition away from these classical models. And so I wanted my version to have the figure model sort of restored to being in front of the artist and sort of, you know, accepting this tradition and kind of embracing it. And so it was quite well into the process before I knew or discovered what my artist self in the painting was going to actually be painting on the canvas. I knew he was going to be extrapolating something from this photograph of the young Percival Molson, but I didn't know what. And at one point I was thinking, oh, he's going to, you know, I'm going to be making this kind of maybe a more modern or flattened version. And I thought, no, that's not what I would do. So, and then one day I just realized that his pose was the same or very similar to this pose of this warrior in the David painting, and then it just kind of clicked that, you know, I'd be transforming him into that.
Yes, I'll come
and then again I didn't know if, you know, whether Notman was consciously doing that, possibly. Mm-hmm. But it was kind of a wonderful moment of you know, things kind of aligning when that came together.
It's quite amazing that the Percival had this kind of similar pose, and it also bring all the I would say unconscious connection between photography and painting. Yes, how the influence go back and fro, and probably that this pose was influenced by a culture in art history or looking in acquaintance with arts, and then to make a painting inspired by a photo. It's another proposition, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then reading a little bit about Percival Molson, he was a star athlete at McGill.
Yes.
And then he was also a soldier. And,
yes.
you know, died in the First World War.
Absolutely. So hero. So it's if we want to continue, the Léonidas and the Thermopyle is a man who is going to die. Is a young man that will at the moment before his death. And now I want to go to talk about details, because I think details are very important in your work. Here there is the nice red Nike shoe, and I also discovered that this is where you have, I don't know if you can see very well, but this is where your signature is hidden in the painting. It's 2014 and it's written Monkman. Can you see it? Yes. So it's nice because it reminds me of the book, Notman book, Portrait of a Period, where on the back it's written Notman. It's exactly the same thing. So here is your signature. But come back to the details. Details are really the place where you make the reversal of meaning, like tropes in rhetoric, you know, when you replace a word by another and it makes a complete difference. The meaning of the sentence is completely different. This is you really working with that. And it's not surprising that all your painting is an allegory. You're still very close to the figure of speech. And in this case, for example, in the photograph, the studio portrait of these two Tina men, you have changed the knife to a paintbrush. Can you see it? And also you put a camera in the end of this other one. So it really tells, it's in a moment, it's the fight between photography and painting. In a sense, we can see that and do you have anything to add to this? Way to.
It's also a way of, again, kind of underscoring the relevance of painting by putting these contemporary elements in it. And I think in this case of giving a digital, camera to this guy here, I mean, if you go to a powwow, that's a modern or present day powwow, that's what you're going to see. So it's also a way of, kind of underscoring Aboriginal identity, but also, affirming that its relevance, in the present. Even though these look like dead Indians, from the past, our cultures are very much alive. And you go to powwows and everyone has cell phones are taking pictures with digital cameras. That's it.
And about here, in this. Photo and the painting, I just want to emphasize the details of the Aboriginal garments. Look here, the details are very meticulous and absolutely beautiful, like here in the moccasin and also in this. So how do you go from the black and white photo to this very, colorful depiction of the details? Do you study from the real object, or?
Well, a bit of both. I mean, in looking at the source material, again, and this comes back to this idea of transformation, taking your source material, not being a slave to it, you transform it. So with the series of black and white photos, I just kind of kept going. I had that masterpiece by Courbet to go back to look at for coloration and palette. So that was kind of my roadmap in a way to think about color. So there were many decisions that had to be made constantly about if this guy's going to be blue, have a blue shirt, then so you kind of just make all your decisions based on the larger composition. And then the details are important because again, it's just about getting very creating a dynamic painting that has broad strokes with large brushes in contrast and in tension with these fine details, because that's sort of how our eye works. We see things that are in focus, we see things that are slightly out of focus, and again, this kind of comes back to how the human eye sees the world, which is different than a camera. A camera captures everything in this kind of like clarity sometimes. You can also blow things out with depth of field, but it was also just a way of it's just something that I've developed as a painter to create movement through the work, so that your eye can have these passages through detail and then into areas that are travels and so you can create rhythm through a painting just with the kind of detail or brushstroke.
Mm-hmm. And this with the emphasis that you put on this garment of the details, it leads me to the question of your Aboriginal identity. That is very always connected with your artistic personality. So would you talk about that? How was it to grow as an Aboriginal and to become an artist?
Well, again, I think, you know, the idea of myself as an Aboriginal person, it's so, again, it's so deeply embedded who I am. I've never really, how do I even talk about this? It's just part of who I am, so therefore it informs my worldview, it informs my work. And I think a number of years ago, again, when I was sort of, you know, searching as a painter and kind of feeling a little bit lost in this vocabulary of painting where I was pushing paint around, it occurred to me that I really needed to be more specific about who I am and where I'm from in order to really define and to find a way of communicating. And there were a lot of ideas that I wanted to communicate that I was failing to communicate as a painter. And that's what really provoked my interest in developing a vocabulary of painting that would allow me to deal with themes such as colonization, such as the impact of Christianity in our communities, and the fallout of colonization. These were important issues to me, and you know, this had a direct impact in my own family, and so it was very much about wanting to find a way of communicating these themes that were very important.
And has it been a problem for you, you know, as an Aboriginal to think of yourself as becoming a great artist? There was no conflict in that, because from a kind of minority sometimes it.
Well, my Cree family always encouraged and pushed us as children to have the confidence to do anything, to play piano, to play violin, to paint, to write. It doesn't change who you are as a person. In fact, it only adds to who you are. So from that point of view, I always felt confident in for instance, moving towards a European tradition of painting. But I knew that I was going to then take ownership of it and make it my own. Having said that, there was the flip side where I felt as though our cultures had been really oppressed, and there was loss. There was a profound sense of loss of culture, loss of language.
Loss of language, and you said that your father didn't speak.
And loss of land. Mm-hmm. So there, at the same time, I'm kind of in between these two worlds, wanting to express that experience, and then feeling, a kind of, at first, a kind of almost a reluctance to move toward a tradition, but then knowing that, to embrace this tradition of painting in a way, it's kind of it's a metaphor for protecting tradition and to respect tradition. And in our own Aboriginal cultures, that wasn't the case. Our cultures were obliterated. So I've kind of used this I guess language of European painting to establish my own language.
Very strongly. If we continue with the details, this was an example of a beautiful detail again, and this figure of the tightrope walker, I find it very, very modern, I would say. It's in a sense also, it's very surprising to find this picture in the Notman archives. And I've made a link between this figure with the umbrella with one of your paintings, Sunday in the Park, where the the dandies have also umbrellas. Is it right to make that connection? Did you, when you saw the umbrella in the picture of Notman, did you think of the dandies?
Yeah, the dandies in my work emerged a number of years ago, and so I immediately made that connection. But I'll just preface that with a little bit of backstory on the dandies. North American painter George Catlin in the 19th century was making, portraits, many paintings of, Native Americans all through North America, and he described these colorful gentlemen as he encountered them everywhere as a dandy, or a faint heart, as they were referred to. And he went to make a painting of one of these gentlemen, and the chiefs and warriors, that he was painting, said, "You can't paint that guy. He doesn't have rank in our society. He's, he might look great, but he doesn't he doesn't have that importance." So the dandy, stood in for me as this character. Again, this kind of comes back to obliterated narratives. He sort of stood in to represent, all of these layers and characters in our histories that, of course, were never authorized in art history. And so I imagined the dandies would have parasols, and you would never see a parasol in a native person with a parasol in a George Catlin painting or a Paul Kane painting. They were obsessed with this idea of First Nations people existing in a sort of pre-contact pure state. But I had come across some ledger drawings of these Kiowa men who were incarcerated during the Indian Wars in the United States, and their drawings that they made of themselves, of their own village, everyone had a parasol. And it was, at the same time that, Edward Curtis was out there, kind of making photographs, and Catlin was making these paintings. So it also talked about this idea that, First Nations people have always been moving forward, and we're not in static cultures. We've never been in static cultures.
An exchange between the
An exchange,
cross-cultural exchange
yes.
have always been.
It's always been there. And again, that is what my work is about, is always about moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a nice, it's inspired also by the Seurat, le Dimanche à la Grande Jatte. The Sunday in the Park, Sunday at La Grande Jatte. I really like these references. Here, this is the portrait of Marc Aurèle de Foix Suzor-Côté that you have painted here at the place where the Courbet model is. Is there a reason for choosing that French-Canadian painter?
Well, this is kind of this painting is a tribute to painting as much as it is to the photography. So as I went through the archives, I came across, these painters that Notman had photographed in his studio. So whenever I found a photograph of a painter, it kind of went into the work. So, and when I discovered who he was, I thought, okay, that's really interesting because he was an important painter in that period of time. So,
and the kind of painting that Suzor-Côté was doing, did you care about that also?
Yeah, of course.
Because he was a kind of at the opposite of photography, in
yeah.
the sense he was still in the tradition of romantic paintings
and landscape.
Yes.
And I had actually referenced one of his sculptures in another painting, so I knew his work.
And I don't know if you were aware of that, the presence of another important painter in the photograph. In this portrait of the two men, the one standing is Frederick Remington, the painter, the American painter and illustrator of the old American West. So there's so many references to what the painting you've done before. And it's interesting to see that Remington's appears to be in your painting.
That I didn't know.
That you didn't know. That's amazing.
I confess, I didn't know that.
And
which guy is it?
The one standing
on the right.
Yes, on the right. It's Frederick Remington, and he did as Bierstadt and Kathleen
Remington and Russell.
Yes, and he came to Montreal in 1887. He visited Notman studio, and they did some scene like that. That was in a series for hunting.
Wow.
So the more you know about photography and more painting, the more your work is interesting. That's something very, very rich, you know. And but why did you choose these couple of men?
I don't know, Helen. You seem to know more about this painting than I do.
It can suggest many, many things.
This pairing here, with the guys
there's many, but I was talking about
specifically these two because they just looked like voyageurs or hunters to me. And you know, I came across a number of these paintings of these guys posing with the dead animals and the buckskin clothing and stuff, so they really kind of fit into that world. And when you see the painting, you kind of see how it transitions from the people dressing up like Indians to these trappers and hunters, and then it kind of, you know, as you move across the painting, and then you see the photographs of the real Aboriginal people, and then the athletes, and of course the Mohawk warrior or the Mohawk lacrosse players who are both Aboriginal and athletes. So they were kind of a nice bridge between those two groupings.
Yes, and it also follows the Corbett composition, with the trivial people on one side and all the other side more familiar, more les groupes d'appartenance, en fait, in the other side. And just here, just to show the public how you worked with the Notman photograph, with this, from this photograph, you only use the background. You use the trees that, if I come back, you see the trees behind the two hunters and the blue knights. The background is from that photograph. And again, in this one, the very handsome young boy, but you just decided to take the chair.
I needed a chair.
I was wondering where you were going to put him, but
so the chair is at the sort of the far left side.
It's really the edge of the painting.
Yeah, and the idea there was that the audience, you know, we would put a bench there and light it in such a way that you could sit on that bench, and
eventually people can
you
see
can kind of
reflection.
sit in this chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. See, I'll try that next time. And I see that the time is the temps passe. And just funny question: if you were to sit down with Notman in his studio, like this, for example, what would you do? What would you ask? If you imagine yourself in this Notman studio, if you had the possibility to...
well, you know, I'd probably want to ask him if he, that pose, the Percival Molson's pose, if he knew that it was referencing the David painond. Okay. That's what I would ask him.
So you would probably speak about art with Notman, because he was very, very... fond of painting, of art.
Yeah, of course.
And,
so yeah, I would probably want to talk to him about painting.
Yes, yes. Good. You would have enjoyed that. And just to, but this is, because we're at the end of the interview, I would like to tell, this is an ad that I found in the magazine Art Forum, the well-known magazine. It's about your exhibition right now at the Denver Art Museum. And this painting is called The History of...
History is Painted by the Victors.
By the Victors. It's also a beautiful title and tells much about what you're doing. And just to finish, what is in your long-term vision, what would you like to achieve? Do you have what is your next challenge?
We're going to become a photographer.
Don't tell me. No, it's not possible. I don't want you to become a photographer. They are very good. Some are very good in photography. Your thing, painting is your.
Yeah. No, I want to just continue doing more large paintings. And like I said, I think I'm, Delacroix talked about how painting takes the longest to master of the different art forms. He says it takes a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And he says you kind of have to approach middle age before you start to really get good at it. So I still have a few years to go. That's a joke for anyone who knows my real age. But the idea is to continue to just move towards making better paintings and
to solve problems of artists. Painting,
for sure. And the next painting I'm doing, well, I'll be starting in the summer, is even bigger than the one upstairs. It's going to be 10 feet by 28 feet. So part of what I'm moving towards is a very large scale. And I think, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, just how when you see a painting in real life, scale it really has, it's an impact that you just don't get when you see a digital image. Mm-hmm. And again, like going back to that painting that I saw in Madrid, I mean, there's something so profound about paintings of a certain scale having a different impact. And so, for many years, even though I've been working with these large-scale paintings and my figures are tiny, the idea was to just improve and get better and develop my own painterly language so that I can start making, changing the scale of the figures in the paintings, and therefore, it has a different impact.
And are you going to make some performances again, or sculpture and all different kinds of multimedia?
So there will be some more installation work. I've got an exhibition coming up in New York. It's my first solo exhibition in a commercial gallery in New York. May 4th it opens in Chinatown, a new gallery.
May 4th.
It's called Sergeant's Daughters, and it's a gallery that the premise of their gallery is to exhibit art or artists who have a relationship with art history. Oh, so it felt like a good match because they want to show artists that have that comfortable relationship with drawing and painting. Mm-hmm. And there I'll be showing 3 or 4 large-scale paintings as well as an installation, a large installation. But my installations also have a relationship to painting. So I like to always kind of like ground, if I'm doing a video or a painting, there's always some kind of reference to.
Okay. And Mischief? Are we going to should we expect the return of Mischief?
Well, she's aging, so it's costing a lot more to light her properly, and they always need a bigger budget for hair and makeup and so forth. So, and the surgeries are starting to cost.
Okay.
So.
It's a surprise, maybe?
Yeah, with the right budget.
Okay. So I'll come back to the old painting, because now it's. I thank you very much, Kent. And now it's the time for we have a few minutes for the period of question and answer, and yes.
First of all, I'd like to say I'm a big admirer. You say you want to become a photographer, but you already do use photography work in your videos and things. So just a couple of questions. Did you most of the figures are male. Did you was that conscious?
Well, again, I think when I was developing the composition, as the idea was emerging, the thing that kind of drove it were these people who were playing dress up, and they were all men. So they were all men dressing up, like Aboriginal people. And then it kind of just evolved from there. When I looked for photographs of Aboriginal people, again there was more men than women. So I like men. So that also I think had something to do with how I wanted to populate my own studio. Well, again, that one guy that's in the poster, I took his jockstrap off, yes. So kind of removed his undies. Yeah, I was trying to be fairly true to who he was. I realized he was 18, so he was of legal age. It's okay.
Oh yeah, just your use of assistants in the studio. I was just curious because I had seen the show you had at Francois Wallet of your studio assistants. What role do they play? Do they actually have hands-on?
Oh yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I realized in my own practice was that at a certain point you have to have assistants or you just don't get anything done. And I think the turning point for me was probably 2006 or something, and I was just completely overwhelmed with just email. Like, I'd spend the first half of a day just answering email, and then I have to go to the art store, and it became impossible to actually get anything done. By the time I got back to the studio, I was exhausted, and then I'd have to start painting. So at that point, I just got to bite the bullet and hire someone, even though I don't think I can afford to. But then as soon as you get someone helping you, you're actually able to produce more, so it becomes this pyramid. And once I understood that, I was able to find some talented young artists that I was able to train. And so I realized, because I was working with this tradition of painting that actually came from that tradition of having younger artists work with another artist, that I was able to just train them to work in my studio. And so everything from like stretching canvases and gessoing and doing underpaintings and
the backgrounds.
Sometimes, but again, there's limitations to what they can do because they're just kids. I mean, they're half my age, and it took me a long time to get to a point where I could paint 30-some figures. And
didn't touch anything.
But the assistants have become very important, and I have 3 painters right now, and a studio manager, and then we have another guy that just basically just does a variety of different things. So I've got 5 people right now.
I'm also an admirer. I was wondering, since you are obviously like the flagship of the Aboriginal artists in Canada, at least that's the way I consider you, to what extent do you feel it important for you as a kind of give back to your own people, to mentor other Aboriginal artists? I'm assuming they all look up to you. Do you spend any time giving workshops, or I don't know, amongst your employees? Are there any Aboriginals, for example?
Well, again, I'm sort of I don't hire people based on their ethnicity, but at this moment, no. But I have done a lot of work with young people, Aboriginal people, and I was really involved in the Imaginative Film and Video Festival. That was when I was making more video work. I still make video work, but I was kind of involved in developing that festival and mentoring young filmmakers, young Aboriginal filmmakers, and encouraging them. Whenever I get asked to do these things, I really like to do them. So I do them when I get asked. I run a studio that employs, like I said, 5 people, so I have to be there a lot just to keep things running. But so some of my time is spent going out and doing workshops or lectures and that kind of thing. Part of what I've noticed and what I get a lot of feedback from is a kind of role model situation where a lot of people are just, even young Aboriginal people, are seeing my work. And that is something that means a lot to me. And I think to strive for excellence and to for me to really focus on being the best artist is going to be the best gift in many ways to this younger generation, because it basically means that anyone, if you apply yourself, it doesn't matter. This year I'm the recipient of the Visual Arts Award, the Aboriginal Achievement Visual Arts Award, and that's intended to really mentor and to encourage young people through this role model idea.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes. Question here.
I know sometimes we see contemporary faces into paintings, so apart from yourself, are there any other contemporary portraits in there?
Well, there's one, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't.
You did. You did.
Yeah, I have to leave some mystery here. I think
Yes,
that's,
okay.
oh, sorry, I don't know.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned in the painting, it was painting the states with parasols, the Aboriginals with parasols. You mentioned that they were from a specific tribe of people, which I've never heard about before. Can you just repeat
The
name?
Kiowa. They were Kiowa, and I think Cheyenne, and they were given these ledger books when they were in prison, just to make drawings, and so they made these drawings of themselves and hunting scenes and social gatherings, and they were Plains Indian, from Plains Indian, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Was this painted here or in your studio in Toronto?
It was painted in my studio. Yeah.
How do you transport it?
Good question. One of the things you have to think about, of course, are all the practical concerns of making large work, and so it was made. It's a triptych, so it's actually 3 panels, and each of them is 6 by 8 feet. So that I've made some large work that didn't fit in museums before, so.
Now you've learned.
I've learned that you have to make work to fit in certain doorways.
Make some concession.
Yeah, the 10 by 28 foot one, I think we're going to have to roll it or something. I don't know. I'll deal with that later.
The paintings that you had in the Ellen show, have they gone into specific collections, or are they marathon?
2 of them are in the collection of Musée d'Art Contemporain here in Montreal, yeah. And they're part of the, if you remember the 2 tents, there were 2 tents, and those paintings are part of that installation, so they belong to Mac now, yeah. And then there's one that's in a private collection.
Question far behind.
Up here?
Yes, yes.
I really enjoyed the show with Wolf and Monkman on many levels. I thought it was extremely witty and also a remarkable thing to educate a lot more people about the levels of interference there and how both learn from each other. So from that you go to the installation you did at the Masmoka in North Adams.
North Adams, yeah.
And that was a great installation there. Was there a relationship between those two in terms of how you were thinking? And does it go in now to, this is like a apotheosis of those 2 things, this giant painting here. Is it or not? Is it a relationship?
I don't think there was really a direct relationship between that piece and what I did at Concordia. I mean, there's always a kind of a flow. Certain themes kind of run through the work, but there was a few years in between. But that installation was part of this other larger body of work that's still incomplete, but exploring Germans. The fascination with Native American people in Germany and in other parts of Eastern Europe, where there's a hobbyist culture where people dress up, and so I'm creating some work around that.
Teresa?
You've spoken very much today about the Notman sources as individual pieces, but I think perhaps Hélène can correct me, but I'm sure some of those were made as pieces for the composites that he did of the fancy dress balls and the skating pieces and whatnot. And I'm just wondering whether or not you referred to those composites in some of Notman's strategies in those, or did you really try to just focus on the individual pieces?
Yeah, I knew they were part of composite photographs, but I didn't reference any specific composite photograph. I mean, as we were kind of like going through the site, they were just popping up. A lot of them were just popping up as individual figures, and you could see that they had been, you know, staged like with strings holding their dresses out. And one of the women in the purple dress there, I decided to paint the armature in that reveals, you know, because to hold people still for long exposures, they would have to put these neck braces on them and stuff, so I painted those in.
But this is a clin d'oeil to all the work of composite that you're doing yourself when you're
because it's a studio,
work.
you know, it's to show the workings inside the studio is kind of what the idea was. Yeah.
Okay, oui.
I think, again, it has to do with the kind of fluidity of just, you know, my creativity just kind of crossing different mediums. And for instance, the exhibition at Concordia was very much about that. There was a video component, and then there were paintings, and then there was an installation component. So it all depends on the project and the opportunities and the time and the budget. You know, what can I pull off for, you know, this project? And usually I try and, you know, do as much as I can, but sometimes, you know, I would have loved to do a media component for this, but we didn't have time, and but, you know, so I generally like to kind of also create video or some kind of media or installation, and the exhibition in New York will have, you know, elements of, you know, the installation and the painting, and I like how they kind of like have this conversation with each other, like you said.
What is the name of the gallery?
It's called Sergeant's Daughters.
Oh, that is the name.
Yeah. There's a question.
Yes, one more question.
You mentioned abstract expression at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Would you do an abstract painting today?
So, sorry, I didn't hear that.
You mentioned abstract expressionism
Yes.
at the beginning
Yes.
of your explorations. Would you do a purely abstract painting today?
Oh, probably not.
Why not?
I don't know, I'm over it.
That's good. You have done some.
Oh yeah, I
in
did. I
your
mean, for the
career.
first 12 years, I just like, you know, push paint around, and I just found I was having like a really circular conversation, you know?
So
And
does that mean that
not that I don't value abstract painting still, but for me personally, I just felt as though I had reached a kind of dead end. And I also felt that painting, you know, that I wanted my paintings to be more than just about painting, and or more than just about color, or more than just about texture or line or.
my question is not so much stylistic choices as zeitgeist, spirit of the time, because I find that it's like abstract somehow is not it anymore for what matters today.
Yeah, well, that could also
relate a lot to your historicity and retrieval of European tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I still reference. I reference different parts of art history in my work. It all depends on the piece, but I'm not interested in making an abstract painting right now. Maybe one day I will. I don't know. Maybe later.
Okay, but that's it. Thank you very much for your questions. And I think Suzanne will say a word.
A few words before you all leave. First of all, thank you, Kent, for this very enlightening conversation, which convinced me, if I needed to be convinced, that, and I'm sure you share my point of view, the work Bienvenue à l'Atelier needs to remain at the McCord Museum. So, so we've decided we are going to keep it after June 1st, but in order to do that we need to acquire the painting, and we're lucky enough to have a very generous donor who has agreed to give us a matching grant of $100,000, but we need to find the other $100,000. So if you want a checkbook, but you please help us finding that money. Of course, we'll be looking at other major donors, but we would very much like to have the contribution of the visitors, the admirers of Kent. So there'll be, and those who come frequently to the museum, so there'll be boxes at the exit of the exhibition, and also coming out tonight if you want to contribute. And it will be permanently exhibit in our atrium here, so you will be able to admire it on an ongoing basis.
And
so,
I should just say that I've already contributed the other $800,000.
Exactly. Thank you, Kent. So thank you, and thank you for coming tonight.